the split-side, adjustable waist, giant pocket skirts. The internet seems to agree that we need more of them. So we've talked about the historical influences, we've talked about my own history with this skirt. You can't be in there. We've talked about Melanie of Wildflower Design and her incredible Coquelicot skirt pattern, which you should all check out, the link is in the description. And we've talked about why I didn't use it. If you missed all that, here's a video. Take a gander. Now it's time to talk about how I made this thing. It's yet another dreary and rainy day in LA, which is, you know, exactly what you expect when you move to LA. Not like it's known for sunshine or anything like that. I'm calling this a tutorial because it's hard to explain why I hesitate to call it a tutorial in the title of the video itself. But here's why I hesitate to call this video a tutorial. I still consider myself a very amateur sewist. I'm still just figuring things out in my own roundabout, winging it way. So this is not going to be like a normal tutorial where I just start at the beginning and show you step by step the exact process to make a specific final product. Instead, I'm going to show you experiments that I'm doing and options that I'm trying, the various ways that you can mix it up and make a final product that maybe is not exactly like mine, but is exactly what you want it to be. I like options, hopefully you like options, plenty of people suggested options, so that is the name of the game. Very random side note, can you tell that I'm really uncomfortable standing up while talking? This is something I struggled with in college too. I was a theater major. Every time you perform a monologue, like the traditional thing is to stand. People would say like, don't get a chair, you'll be looked down on for doing that. And it felt so weird to me because I don't talk standing up. I look for every opportunity to sit down, which is why all of my intros and outros, I'm usually sitting down. It's okay, I'll survive. Let's keep going. So if you're an expert sewist and you're watching this video and at any point you're like, she has no idea what she's talking about, I would just like to say, that's correct. Follow this tutorial at your own risk. Mostly what I'm going to be doing here is just moving forward with my typical next step. I made this skirt as a mock-up, a test piece. I really like it in the end, but there's a lot of little things wrong with it. Seriously, y'all, it may look good in a reel or a photo, but whoo, the construction's not great. I'll have to show you some close-ups because, y'all, this was my first time putting grommets into clothing, and while I genuinely enjoyed whacking things with a hammer, they're terrible. So many people commented on the reel and were like, oh, you hate putting in zippers, but you're willing to put in grommets? I did not at all know what I was getting into because I had never done it before. And honestly, I feel like it was tricky, but it's not hard. It's kind of fun to do. I just had no idea what I was doing. Don't be like me. Go watch a video first and have somebody tell you how to put grommets in. I just straight up went for it. One of them is backwards because I wasn't paying attention. What's new? And that's about all of the standing and talking I can do. I'm gonna get a chair. Just readjust the framing a little. Okay, moving on. So I never make the same thing twice. I don't really see the point. Don't you want to make something better the second time? And the process of making this, the amount of time that has passed since I made it and allowed me to mull over the design, the numerous times I've now put it on, and the multiple people on Instagram who offered their helpful advice, their creative thoughts, their criticisms, have given me many ideas of not only how to improve this version of the skirt, but also how to make a just plain different version, or like 30 different versions. Y'all know I have no chill. And this is again why I have to recommend just getting the Coquelicot pattern from Wildflower Design if you're wanting to make a split side skirt. Melanie did all of that work for you. That's the joy of using a pattern. It's a joy that my brain rejects, for some reason. But you don't have to be like me. You can accept written instruction and be on your merry way, and I'll still be back here trying to figure out the radius of a 32-inch circle. If that grand show of confidence didn't lead you straight away from this video already, then okay, let's try some stuff, shall we? But in a different location. I have switched location. Is your interest piqued? So in essence, you can break down this skirt, and particularly the parts of this skirt that make it special or interesting to people, into 3 separate areas and 3 challenges that we are going to tackle together. First, you have the skirt body. the actual bulk of the fabric, the thing that's giving you the swoosh and the drama and the length and the fullness. Next up you have the waistband, which includes the special points of how high, how wide, how tight, and how do you get this skirt on. And last, and yes, this does get its own section, are the pockets. Pockets for me are always a separate section in making a piece of clothing because there's so many different forms of pockets and so many different ways to put them in. So my goal here is to make 2 different versions of this skirt in this particular video so that I can show a few different options. And the first section we're going to look at is the skirt body. So I asked you guys to vote in a story poll on Instagram for which fabric I should use, and this one won by a landslide. I'm kind of glad it did because it's very thin and breezy and light, unlike the other fabrics that I had and unlike this fabric that I used last time, which was a duvet cover. The thing is, I don't think it'll handle pockets well. I like my pockets to be pretty sturdy, so I wouldn't really want to make them out of this material. But as someone pointed out, this fabric that did not win actually matches the flowers on this fabric really well. This one is much sturdier. It feels more like almost a linen-y sort of thing. Maybe it's a twill. I don't know. When I don't know what a woven fabric is, I pretty much just always compare it to linen. So while this is going to be the bulk of the skirt, I will probably use this fabric for the pockets. I might use it on the inside of the waistband to give a little more structure there. I don't know. Right now I'm even thinking about combining it into the body of the skirt. But since I decided to make 2 skirts, I am also going to be using the second highest vote, this cupcakey mushroom teapot and teacups fabric that is abso-freaking-lutely adorable. I bought this for a project a while ago and then realized I couldn't use it because the print is directional, but there's actually quite a bit of it, so that should not be a problem this time. Am I gonna have to split this up into 2 videos because I have so much to talk about? All right, let's move to the cutting table. Totally random side note because I just need someone to, like, I don't know, validate me right now. There were a couple people who commented on the reel of this skirt. Something along the lines of, oh my goodness, using a public restroom in that skirt would be a nightmare. Which really confused me because I kind of assumed everyone did what I do with skirts when they go to the bathroom, and now I'm questioning whether that's true. I mean, unless I'm wearing a pencil skirt, this is what I do with all of my skirts and dresses. You floof up the back, you crunch it together in the front, and you fling it over your shoulder. I know I'm not alone in this because you're never alone in anything, but is this not like the established way to go to the bathroom when wearing a skirt? Yeah, I just need somebody to tell me that I'm not the only one who does this. Please validate me. Okay, thank you. Moving on.
Well, I moved so slowly that now it's the next morning.
Honestly though, I had just started really late in the day yesterday, and then the dreary raininess kind of got to me, so I did some stitching instead. But now we're back at it. It is still dreary and rainy, but at least the birds are singing. That's nice. So we are going to start our tutorial exploration experimentation with the skirt body. And honestly, this information kind of applies to making any skirt without a pattern, so there's that. I would again like to note, because I don't like conflict, that this is not the right way to do it. This is just how I do it. Okay, so when making a skirt, the first thing I look at is, do I want this skirt to be circle or panel? Circle, of course, means that you choose a radius of your circle and you cut out actual circles of fabric with holes for your waist. Even if they're not all connected at the start and therefore they are technically like circular panels, whatever, you get me. Panels could range anywhere from just using a rectangle of fabric to cutting out a triangle of fabric. The more triangular your panel is, the fuller the skirt will be on the bottom. The next layer of this process is, what are you going to do with those circles or panels? Are you going to leave them as is, meaning that the waistline of your circles or of your panels matches your waistline, matches the waistband measurement, and there will not have to be any changes made to those waistlines in order to make them fit? Or do you want to gather or pleat your skirt? In both of these options, you're taking a waistline that is much bigger than your actual waistline, and you are shrinking it to match your waistline measurement, either by gathering it, just that's what gathering sounds like, or pleating it, which is putting very specific folds into the fabric to shrink it down to the proper size. So if we make a fun little diagram of this, because diagrams are fun, you've got circle or panel. I'm gonna be so annoyed editing this when I have to put words wherever I'm randomly pointing right now. Why do I do this to myself? Moving down from there, we have flat, gathered, or pleated. And now my battery might die at any point, so I'm gonna go change that. So when figuring things out for myself, I like to approach in the form of a question. With each of these options, there are questions to ask in order to figure out what you're going to do for your skirt body. If we are choosing circle skirt, our main question is how many circles or portions of circles? Are you going to do a half circle, a full circle, 2 circles, 10 circles? Good times. We're not getting into how much fabric you're going to need yet or what the measurements are, so that's my only question for circle skirts at the beginning. For panel skirts, I have 2 questions. How many panels are you going to make? You could literally, technically, do 1 panel. You could do 1 big rectangle, wrap it around your waist, put a closure in the back, and make it fit. You could do 36 panels. Totally up to you. The second question for panels is what shape are you going to make them? Ranging from a rectangle to a triangle. I suppose you could do an inverted one, but that's getting into like avant-garde design, so no. So now moving down to the second layer of our diagram. If you're choosing to do flat, then you don't really add any more questions. It's the same as before. This is just when you need to consider that whatever your waist measurement is what those panels or circles need to equal around their waistband. If we select gathering, then we have some new questions. If we're going in order here, I suppose you've already decided this, but you want to decide which shape are you gathering. You can take a rectangle and gather the top into your waist, and you will have a very bell-shaped skirt. You could take triangular-ish panels and gather those to your waist, and you'll be a little less bell. You'll have a little more of a flow to the bottom of your skirt. You can also take a circle skirt, cut out that waistband area to be bigger than your waist, and gather your circle skirt. You're going to have a very full swooshy skirt if you do so. Then your next question is how much do you want it gathered? And this is where you get into more of how much fabric do you have. The question here is basically how big are you going to make that waistline pre-gathering? Is it going to be 1.5 the size of your waist, so there's just some light gathering? Is it going to be twice the size of your waist? Is it going to be 5 times the size of your waist with tons of gathering? And now my mic battery's about to die. It's a good morning. Back at it. So finally, for pleating, this is the one that we have the most questions for. Again, you have to start by asking which base shape are you going to be using. You could use a rectangle, you could use triangular shapes, you could pleat a circle skirt. Then you have to decide what type of pleats are you doing. There are so many types of pleats. I did a whole video on this. Actually, I kind of did 2 videos on this, so you can check those out if you're interested. But there are a lot of options. And once you decide which type of pleats you're going to do, or kind of tied into that decision, I suppose, you're also deciding how big are you going to make those pleats and how close together or far apart or possibly overlapping are you going to make those pleats. All of these questions, all of these decisions are going to affect the silhouette and shape of your final skirt. People with different body types are going to like different things. So one thing that I found interesting is a few people commented on this skirt, like, if you don't like using zippers, why don't you just use elastic? We're not talking waistbands yet, but sometimes the waistband and the closure that you choose will affect all of this stuff here. Elastic being one of those things. Your only option with an elastic waist skirt is gathering, because elastic automatically gathers in your skirt. You cannot have an elastic waist skirt that's flat. I guess you could technically say like a stretchy pencil skirt is elastic waist and flat, but that's like a whole different thing. So yeah, we're not on the waistband section yet, but keep in mind that if you have a specific waistband style you're planning to use, that might have some effect on what you're able to do for the skirt body. And on that note, when I'm making decisions out of this diagram, I'm thinking about how is this skirt going to look and feel on my body type. So I tend to avoid elastic waist skirts or anything with all of that gathering on top because it just doesn't really look right on my personal body type, in my personal opinion. If you've been around, you know that I am absolutely obsessed with circle skirts. Circle skirts give a very trumpet shape. You can see this by doing a quick twirl. They'll spin out and float up like this. Panel skirts can give you a more trumpety shape the more triangular you make those panels and the more panels that you use. On the other hand, if those panels are more rectangular, you're not really going to get much of a twirl. It's just gonna kind of stand out like this instead of giving that full trumpet effect. Again, all of these are fun shapes. They're all great to explore.
One eternity later.
Y'all, I literally paused mid-sentence because yard work started outside. And now it's an hour later because that's how long they do yard work. Carrying on my personal body type, I don't really like to have that belled out shape around my hips. I prefer for something to flare out more around the knees and draw the eye downward. Anyway, that is all general skirt information that really applies to any kind of skirt except maybe like a fitted pencil skirt style. So I'm going to use all of that information to decide which two types of skirts I'm going to make today, because any of these can be done in the split side style and added to that adjustable waistband. Literally any of them. So this is, I guess, skirt number 2, but starting with this one, I think what I'm going to do is a panel skirt, probably just straight up rectangles, because I want to pleat it. I haven't done pleating yet on the split side version, so I think that's gonna be interesting to try. So now I need to answer those 3 other questions that pleating brings up. Which type, how big, how close. I did find out in my previous pleating video that I'm a big fan of military rolled pleats, but I don't think I want to fold this fabric quite that much because I want as much of this print to be visible as possible. So I think I'm going to do what I refer to as box into knife, where you do a box pleat in the center on each side and then knife pleat after that going out. I'm going to make the pleats fairly big. I'll decide exactly how big when I'm doing it, but I'm guessing probably like 2 inches for each pleat, maybe only 1. You kind of have to play around with the fabric when it comes to pleats and see how it drapes and how it looks. But I do know that I want the pleats to be touching but not overlapping, which means, according to what I learned in my pleating video, I'm going to need 3 times the amount of fabric as what I want the final measurement to be. So doing the split side method is not really any different at the beginning than doing any other skirt. You generally do have side seams on a skirt, especially if you want to put in side seam pockets. So this is basically the same thing. You're splitting your skirt up into the front half and the back half. I have a 32-inch waist, so I'm basically thinking of 16 inches and 16 inches is what I need in the end. 3 times 16 inches means I need 48-inch panels. I'm gonna add a little extra on there for seam allowance. I always go big with my seam allowance, a full inch, so I'm bumping that up to 50-inch panels. And then because I want these panels to overlap each other on the side, I'm going to add an extra 2 inches on each side as well, so that when you are folding the skirt on, there's no chance of having a gap there. I'll show you later on when we're doing the pockets, how having the pockets underneath also makes sure that you can't see through that gap, that you're not seeing skin. But just to be safe, I do like to add a little extra as well. So I need 2 52-inch rectangles, and I will pleat those down into my 16-inch waist, technically more of an 18-inch waist, so that I have that overlap on the sides. The last thing I need to decide is how long I want this skirt to be. I like to make my skirts on my natural waist, which is rather high for me because I have a long torso, and then I want this one to end like right below the knee. So for me, that's about 25 inches long. Again, I do large seam allowances, so to allow for hemming and attaching it to the waistband, I'll add an extra 2 inches to that. I think most people would only add 1, but I go overboard. So the final measurement for my skirt body for skirt number 2 is I need 2 rectangles that measure 27 inches by 52 inches. And that's it for the skirt body of skirt number 2. That's all I need. It's pretty simple. We will get into the waistband and the pockets in the next video. So before I cut anything out on this fabric, I'm going to first test the pleats. I'm doing it upside down and I'm not measuring them, that's fine. I just want to see what the box and the knife pleats kind of look like, how they fall on this fabric. And yeah, I like that. And I do like these wider pleats as well. Maybe a little bit smaller, so I might make each pleat 1.5 inches. All right, that's decided. So normally if I'm cutting out a rectangular panel skirt, I'm going to be cutting it this way. The selvages on these sides here, because that's where I have all the length. However, this of course is a directional print, as I mentioned before. Therefore, if I want the print facing in the right direction on the skirt, I have to cut my panels out this way. Unfortunately, it is not 60-inch wide fabric, it's 45-inch wide fabric. So what I'm going to have to do here is split my 52-inch long panels in half and sew a seam up the middle. In order to allow for that seam allowance on that middle seam, I'm going to do 2 squares that are 27 by 27 for each side of the skirt.
12 seconds later.
All right, so admittedly, I am now changing my mind a little bit. Welcome to the world of making anything with me. I like to use as much fabric as possible, and I like really full skirts. So since I know I'm going to have to use 2 panels on each side of the skirt in order to reach the waist measurement that I want, now I'm thinking rather than cut out a square, I might as well cut out, well, not a triangle, a trapezoid. So instead of just cutting out 27 by 27 like this, I could cut out 27 by 44, which means now the hem of my skirt, instead of falling like this, should fall a little more like this. So that's what we're gonna do right now. To make it easier and to make sure that my diagonals are the same on each side, I'm going to fold my fabric in half like you normally would. Unroll. All right, so first I'm going to measure height. I wanted 27 inches long, if I recall correctly from 3 minutes ago. I have a short memory. And then I need half of 27 for the width at the top, because the fabric is folded in half. Half of 26 is 13, so half of 27 is 13.5. And then I want to use my full width here at the bottom, which is about 44 inches. So I'm going to go from my 13.5 mark right to the corner and do a straight line. And that's it. I just need 4 times that shape. So I'll cut out the first one, and then I will lay that one on top of the fabric 3 more times and cut out 3 more. Okay, we have all 4 panels cut out here. I'm going to have a much fuller skirt than if they had been squares, and instead of big leftover squares, I just have a few triangles left over. I do want to point out though, once again, that I started this with a huge amount of fabric, so I knew I would have plenty left over. Like, I have at least 2 or 3 yards left here, so I didn't have to consider ahead of time fitting everything that I needed onto my fabric without running out. If you're using a smaller amount of fabric, you are going to want to plan all of this out on the amount of fabric that you have before you start chopping into it. So I'm setting this fabric aside for now. We are gonna bring it back when we get to the waistband and the pockets in the next video. But for now, let's go back to skirt number 1 and get that one planned and measured and cut out. For skirt number 1, which we're doing second for some reason, I do want to return to the circle skirt, but a single circle this time instead of the double circle. And I was thinking last night about how to combine these 2 fabrics. So as I mentioned before, this one's very light and drapey. I don't want to make the pockets out of it, and I'm not really crazy about the idea of making the lace-up waistband out of it because of the way that it pulls. It's not stretchy, but it has that sort of ease. That just doesn't seem like a great choice for a very structural waistband like this. But then I got an idea that I think is a little more interesting of an overall design, and I'm trying to get more interesting with my designs instead of just using one fabric and doing one thing. So we're going with this idea. Plus, it combines 2 different methods, so that's fun. What I'm going to do is use the peach fabric for the waistband, the pockets, and the top part of the skirt, which will be a single circle skirt. But I'm going to make that very short. I'm gonna cut the length off basically like right below my butt. And then I'm going to add this as the bulk of the skirt as a gathered ruffle. So it will be a rectangle. I'm going to gather it up and stitch it to that circle skirt. This isn't something I've tried before, adding a rectangular ruffle to a circular skirt, or really doing ruffles at all. So I have no idea what the final product is going to look like, what kind of silhouette it's going to give, but this is why I said at the beginning, you're coming along for my experiments. We will figure it out together. Since I know that I'm doing one full circle with the peach fabric, I need to find my waist radius, which I usually just go use a calculator online to do because I don't like math. For a full circle, it's generally 4.77 for me. I always go overboard because I don't want to do something that precise. And I want seam allowance, and like I said on skirt 2, I also want a bit of overlap. So I'm gonna bump that up and just do 5 inches as my waist radius. And then like I said, I'm cutting this off right below my butt. So it doesn't need a hem, but it does need a seam allowance on that side. This would be like 13 inches from my natural waist, so I might bump it up to 15 just to be safe, and then I can always trim more off if I need to. For the ruffle on the bottom, I'm just using a rectangle again. The amount that it's going to be gathered is basically going to be dependent on how much fabric I have here. For the length of the ruffle, I want the whole skirt to be around 30 inches long, kind of hitting me mid-calf. So the circle skirt, the final amount showing should be about 13 inches. So the ruffle, the final amount showing should be about 17 inches. I'm gonna bump that up to 18 for hem and seam allowance. And there we go. That was the body of skirt number 1. So as you can see, planning out and measuring out and cutting out the body of your skirts is not really difficult at all. You can get more complicated with it if you want to, but it doesn't have to be complicated. All right, so we've got our peach fabric. Again, I have a ton of this. I chose large pieces of fabric to start with because I didn't want to worry about cramming things on in this video. I need at least 20 inches for the length of my circle skirt plus the length of my waist radius. So right now the fabric is folded in half. I'm going to fold it again this way so that I have 4 connected layers. So I'm going to start from my completely folded side. This is where I have no raw edges. And from the corner, I'm measuring 5 inches diagonally into the skirt on all angles really to draw this quarter circle that will be the waistband. And I'm just putting little marks. So now I am measuring from that corner 20 inches, and that will give me the hemline of my mini circle skirt. All right, and that's it. That's our circle skirt. So we're good to cut that out. So because this is short and I was able to fit the entire thing on my fabric at one time, I actually just have a fully connected circle. But this is both the front panel and the back panel, and this is where the whole split side thing makes a bit of a difference. I need 2 half circles instead of 1 full circle. So I'm just gonna fold this back in half. I recommend just cutting it before you open it up to look at the full circle. Save yourself some time. And then I'm just going to cut down both sides so I have 2 halves of the circle. Okay, so now we have 2 half circles, and each of these should be half of my waist radius or waist measurement, and yes they are. So we can set the peach fabric aside until we get to the waistbands and pockets and move on to the floral fabric. So here we just need 2 rectangles, 1 for each side of the skirt, 18 inches high, I guess you'd say, and an indeterminate length because it's just going to get gathered up, and I'm okay with whatever amount of gathering the fabric allows. This fabric does have sort of a very light stripe behind the flowers, and I want that stripe to be vertical rather than horizontal, which means, like for the cupcake fabric, I need to be cutting across this way instead of with the selvage or the grain line or whatever it is. So one thing I can kind of do to give myself an idea of what it's going to look like, that way I don't end up cutting way less fabric or way more fabric than I want, is measure the circumference of the hem side, the lower end of my circle skirt. It doesn't have to be precise, but it gives you an idea. So each half is 64 inches around the hem. So if I cut 1 panel out of this, it would not even be gathered on the lower half of that skirt. It would be too small. So I need at least 2 panels on each half of the skirt in order to even be able to gather it to start with. That's information you want. And the question here becomes how many lengths of 18 inches, which is the height that I want that ruffle to be, can I fit on this fabric? 5, ooh, and not quite 6. Well, dang it. So I think what I'm actually going to do is cut out 5 and then cut the 5th one in half and put it between the 2 panels. So there's big panel, small panel, big panel. So easy as that. I am going to measure a nice straight line 18 inches up for the first one, and then I'm literally just going to lay that first one on the fabric, just like we did on the cupcake fabric, until I have cut out all 5. And that's 5. Okay, so we are fully cut out. There is skirt number 1, and there is skirt number 2. So normally, of course, I would finish cutting out the skirts, the waistband, the pockets, etc., before I start constructing them. But since I am splitting this exploration tutorial into the 3 parts, we are going to keep going with the skirt bodies and get those constructed. And then we will come back in the next video to plan, measure, and cut out the waistband and pockets and construct the final skirts and all that. So let's again start with skirt number 2, which I guess is only skirt number 2 because the fabric got fewer votes. It's fine, we still love you. Before I can start pleating the top of this, I need to sew my 4 panels into 2 panels. So let's go to the sewing machine. I do not yet have a serger or overlocker, as it is called in some places, so I French seamed my 2 pieces together. There are a lot of other ways to finish edges and seams and stuff, and that's not really what this video is about, so I'm going to avoid going into great detail about that. For some reason, I didn't realize when I was cutting these out that I would be talking so much. Now I accept that, so we're going back to a good mic. Sorry about the sound earlier. So I have my 2 panels sewn together, and here's something I didn't think about while cutting them out. If you're doing triangular shapes or any sort of diagonal being sewn together, you're going to end up with V shapes where they meet. So I don't mind that at the top, because by pleating this fabric, I'm going to end up curving it anyway. However, I don't really want a V on the hem. So I folded the panels back into quarters and cut a gentle curve on the pointed side so that the hem will look nice. Now I'm going to do that exact same thing on this one. We're learning as we go, y'all. Much better. I'm so used to doing circle skirts that anytime I do panel skirts, I forget about the curved hem. Okay, so now we are going to pleat the skirt body. I think I said 1.5 inch pleats before, so I'm going to mark 4.5 inches with a bigger mark and then 3 inches with a small mark, so then I know exactly where to fold my pleats. And I do have a significant amount of overhang after my last pleat. I've got about 3.5 inches on each side, and that is literally just because I am so overcautious. Don't be as overcautious as me if you're really trying to make sure that you're conserving fabric. I am always so afraid of things being too small. You can always take it in, you can't always let it out. I am going to slightly overlap the center pleats just so that there's really no gap there, and because I have plenty of extra again, so I can afford to lose a 1/2 inch. So there we have our full pleats. I'm gonna run back to my machine and baste over that to hold it in place. Okay, so we have now the 2 halves of our skirt body. We could go ahead and connect them on the sides, but I find it easier to put on the pockets first before doing that, so we're gonna leave it at this for this video. So sitting on my natural waist, which is where I like my skirts to fall, you can see that each half is more than half of my waist. That's sort of where your normal side seam would be, and I've got quite a bit past that, again, because I'm overcautious and paranoid. But that's good because I don't want my skirt to end where the natural side seam would be. I want it to extend about 1 inch past that, so I can get that overlap right there. I'll basically just be taking a bit off of the sides so that it ends about right there. What I did get correct is where the pleats end. The pleats are ending directly on the side seams, which is exactly what I wanted. Let's go back to skirt number 1. All right, so we have seen how to prep a pleated skirt body. If you were going to be prepping a flat skirt body, such as this circle skirt, there's really no prep. This is it. I have 2 halves. They are going to be attached to the waistband. If you're just making a single circle skirt, that's it. You're ready to move on to the waistbands. But we do have to prep our gathered section of this skirt. So this same prep would be true even if you were doing this on the waistband rather than as a ruffle as I'm doing it. Like the pleated one, we're just going to start by sewing all of our panels together. I don't really know why I came all the way back out here. We're just gonna go back to the sewing machine now. So because these strips have been cut out from selvage to selvage, I don't actually need to do French seams on these. I'm just gonna sew the selvage together. All right, so now we have our one giant piece of ruffle here. So to gather this whole thing, I'm going to sew 2 parallel seams across the entire top with the least amount of tension and the largest stitch. I love how fast it is to sew gathering lines. So this piece is approximately 150 inches long, and I need to gather it down to match the hemline of my circle skirt, which is approximately 64 inches long. So I'm just gonna get some gathers going first, and then once I have some kind of evenly spread across the whole panel, I'll start pinning it to the hem of my circle skirt to measure the length and see how much I need to continue gathering it. I like hand gathering. It's quite satisfying. It is a good idea to mark your center first, which I completely forgot to do, but I've pushed all the gathers out of that center panel. So by lining up the 2 seams that connect that center panel onto the 2 side panels and then folding it in half, I can mark the center, and then I'll be able to line it up properly to kind of evenly spread the fabric out. I've probably already over-gathered, so let's start lining this up. Same thing, I'm gonna fold this in half and then mark the center. So now I can go ahead and pin the 2 centers together and then gather from the outsides in on both sides. So if you were doing this as a gathered skirt, as in this right here is going to attach to your waistband rather than to another piece of skirt, you may want to wait to gather it until you have your waistband fully cut out, just so that you have something to measure it up against. Once I have it gathered to the right size with all of the gathers as evenly distributed as I am able to do, perfection is unnecessary, I'm just going to start pinning it down really at very close intervals. I have the gathered ruffle pinned all down the hem of the circle skirt. Now with a smaller stitch and more tension, I'm going to sew it on. I again want to French seam, so I'm actually sewing on the right side of the fabric first, then I'll flip it and sew again. Alrighty, so once again, we have 2 finished skirt body panels. The other one's over there. I do need to iron this seam down in the back, and I need to iron the pleats on the other one. I'm gonna iron. I will. I promise. As I suspected, this lower fabric does drape quite beautifully. It's very nice. We will finish all of the construction in the next video. It feels really weird to me to end a video without having a final product, but I really wanted to be thorough with this tutorial and exploration and experimentation, and I did not want this video to be an hour long. So come back next week, or if it's the future, just click on part 2 of this video, and we will talk about the adjustable waistbands, those giant pockets, and how to fully put together your skirt, and I don't know, spin around in it. That's always fun. Until such time, bye. Y'all, my stomach is making the craziest noises right now. That's something to think about. There's also a staple just hanging out in it over here. With the skirt body.
This is why I don't like using pins. Hello, birds.
All of these questions, all of these decisions.
Ooh, cast me as a dead body, please.